So welcome to this episode of Storytelling Radio. Here I would like to, more or less, give a really concise treatment of whether free will exists. And also we can't give this really serious problem any concise treatment, but here we go anyway. So, this debate, long-going debate about free will is tightly coupled with the concept of causality. And if you look at modern science, of course, causality is at the center of everything. And in physics, causality is taken very seriously. And there are many different nuances about that. And especially if you take into consideration quantum mechanics, of course, you can take many different stances about causality. However, in a nutshell, this idea that given the present state of affairs, you would be able to predict more or less the state of affairs at a small amount of time later, it seems to be a really steadfast starting point for anybody who is interested in the scientific investigations of the world. And there doesn't seem to be anything else to be done. And so whether you take the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics or many worlds view, or for that matter, Bayesian view of quantum mechanics, it is, at the end of the day, the state of the world alone that would determine the next state of the world, and so on, so on, so on. So you don't really have to stick to differential equations or Hamiltonians or Lagrangians or Feynman diagrams or the automata or whatever. I mean, you can take any theoretical framework if you like, but it remains that there's nothing external to this world. That is actually the single most important aspect of the world as regards free will, because if there's nothing external to this world apart from physical selves and so on, then it would follow that the procession of the world is determined by the dynamics of those materials that belong to this world alone. So you don't really have to consider anything external to that. So that is the gist of it, and end of the story. So this whole debate about free will, I think, seems to be depending on whether there is something external to the world. And when you think of something external to the world, of course the usual suspects are the phenomenal qualities of our experience, the fact that we have consciousness at all. This is a very external to the physical world, so it would seem. So the kind of property that we associate with the particles, for example, mass, electricity, electrical charges, spin, and so on, they can be understood as properties as pertinent to the processings of the world in internal nature. But in addition to that, we do have this consciousness, and it does seems to be external to the world. So where does it stand? So the intuition that the problem of phenomenal consciousness has very much to do with the problem of consciousness is indeed justified, because consciousness is something that is external to the world, or so it seems. So does the fact that we have consciousness have to do with whether we have free will. Some people will say that, okay, we have consciousness, which is totally external to the physical world. So we should probably have a mechanism where the conscious state of mind would be able to move around the particles involved in brain function in such a way that what we think, what we feel, what we intend, the phenomenal consciousness would affect how we move our body, controlled, of course, by the brain. And that's how free will is realized. That would be the usual way to go forward when you consider the relationship between free will and phenomenal consciousness. But of course, there are really serious problems associated with that. For one thing, how can it be made consistent with our physical worldview? If once you say that conscious experience is external to the physical world, then ontologically, epistemologically, where does it stand? Is it like John Eccles wrote a series of articles, some of them in his books and some of them in his papers, and John Eccles basically thought that there was another world in addition to the physical world, and you need to somehow reconcile the fact that we have consciousness by incorporating this additional world into our worldview, so that we would say that, okay, so let's say the physical world is world 1, but then we have world 2, which is something that would support our phenomenal consciousness, and world 2 would somehow control world 1 in some way or another, and vice versa, because it is known that when neurons in the brain are activated in certain ways, the phenomenal consciousness in world 2 and Eccles' paradigm would be affected. So there would be bidirectional pathways of influences, if you like, between these two worlds. So that is one way to solve the problem of free will and the problem of consciousness in one stroke. But of course, this is rather a simplistic viewpoint, and not many people like it. I don't subscribe to this particular setup of the world as a solution to the long-standing enigma. If we could do that, that would be really simplistic. But it doesn't seem to be the case. So, either that, or you probably try to eliminate consciousness altogether, and you deny that there's consciousness at all. And that is a logically coherent standpoint, but one that is probably not intellectually satisfying. So when it comes to this question of externality, because our intuition does tell us that there appears to be something that is external to the physical world, and by incorporating that, we can probably solve the problem of free will. But that would be simplistic, and we somehow need to amend that. But it's really difficult because we can't really conceive of a way forward. We can't really conceive of a way that would lead us into interesting middle ground. And simply put, that's the enigma. That's a stalemate that we are in. We can't admit two worlds model, but we can't also stick with the one world model. So what is the relation between physical phenomenon and conscious phenomenon perception? This is a really difficult issue. So, probably we are being too simplistic, and there might be some mathematical relationships between the physical processes and the phenomenal conscious mind. But then, so let's assume that in the near future we have come up with a satisfactory description of the physical world, in addition to the phenomenal consciousness. Then where does free will stand? Because mind you, this is the single most important question in human life, because without the assumption of consciousness and free will, you can't, for example, say you have a robust foundation for ethics. If you don't have free will, then how can you reproach somebody for doing something unjustifiable, like what Mr. Putin has been doing in the last year? And so, how can we strive to make our lives better? Because I strive to make my life better. That's why I am doing this 3-brain radio recordings. This is, as I repeatedly say, a poor man's answer to Alex Friedman podcast. I walk in Tokyo and I talk into my iPhone and do my best. I do not have the facility to invite guests, and so I do it on my own. And so I'm doing this in the hope of making my future better in some ways or another. But if everything is done, then this is something that my body would be doing anyway, without my intention. Then what is the rationale for striving? What is the reason for trying to make it better? This is madness. I mean, this is something really strange, because if you pursue scientific investigations and take it at face value, then probably you need to deny the existence of free will. But if, on the other hand, you take a practical approach and you do want to, live a better life or make this world a better place, then you do need to believe in free will and try to make it better by the application of free will. But so this is really weird, in a weird situation. We are in suspension, and we, in our daily life, in my daily life, I don't think about free will so much. Of course, professionally, I think about it, and I try to write papers about it. But as a practical, living person, it doesn't really make sense to think about free will too seriously, because it does interfere with your life. And now, talking about free will in my street brain act is interfering with my usual routine works. So, and the most interesting thing is, if you come to understanding of free will in some really convincing manner, does it change the way we make choices and we live? Does it change the way we, evaluate life, how we assess the utility of life, so to speak? Does it change our life in any substantial manner? That's a really interesting question, and I think people like Proust try to answer that. So when Proust wrote his magnum opus Associated du Temps Perdu, I think one of the hidden issues was free will. How can we make ourselves better and in pursuit of the lost time? Probably we can regain the time lost in the past, and we can probably, try to be a better person. But that's something that is really strange about novel writing. It does give you some insight, and it does give you some relief from actual world. But at the end of the day, you can imagine Proust having finished his magnum opus Alceste du Temps Perdu in Search of Lost Time, and then his life would go on. Like myself, I am going with my life in Tokyo, and I haven't finished reading in Search of Lost Time. Probably that's the problem. That's my single problem. If I finish reading Proust's masterpiece, maybe I don't have any problems anymore. I would have solved all the problems associated with life. But I haven't actually finished reading in Search of the Lost Time, and I probably in the past I have pretended from time to time to have read it, like I have pretended to have read War and Peace by Tolstoy. But suppose that I have read in Search of Lost Time, and I had some glimpse of the role of free will in human life and how we should go about our business of doing things in life. Then does it change my life? Does it? I don't know. I mean, the whole human society is a great arena for experimentation. And there have been many people, religious people, philosophical people. All of these people have tried to make a case about the significance of life. And they have come up with all these wonderful theories about the significance of life. But to be honest, I don't think a single one has succeeded in uplifting himself or herself above the mundane understanding level of us humans. And so if you do have a level of conviction that would uplift you above the common man, how can you convince other people? And so, it seems to me that with the case of free will, probably those people who have made any substantial progress might not be among us. I mean, they might be secretly hidden in some places. They might be actually biding their time, unable to tell the world the truth, because the world is too stupid to know it. And so, with the problem, with the enigma of free will, the most interesting question is the great conservatism, if you like, of our attitude toward it. And it does seem that there would be venues for investigation, but once you start following some pathways of thinking, then it would lead to a dead end, because beyond that point, you wouldn't be a normal person anymore. So I think that's a kind of a safety stop, where you stop. Probably I have stopped at that many times, because it doesn't really pay to make sense to think through the problem of free will, because if you do think through, then you might be in trouble. You might be, flagged for being too intrusive about something that probably would be better left untouched. So I started with a very simplistic analysis of the dividing Delta Xiaowu in free will, in the treatment free will. And it does seem that, the matter is quite simple. Well, there's a huge difference between being simple and simplistic, but I think in some cases we are making the arguments sound sophisticated. So in order to escape the obvious safe stops, we don't want to go beyond the safe stops. So probably that's why we are making our arguments sophisticated, as in the case of quantum mechanics, for example. So with that thought, I think I'll stop my recording today, and I do hope to have you listening to this poor man's attempt for enlightenment. So thank you for. I need to summarize. That's the format. So the problem of free will is difficult, but probably we are making it more difficult than it actually is on purpose, because if we go beyond some secure base of investigation, then we might be in trouble. So we might actually be making the investigation of free will more difficult and more complex than it actually is by stopping well before the safety stop and making a really detailed argument within the box appears sophisticated. So that's my thought, and thank you for listening to my this episode of Street Brain Radio, and I hope you would come back again. Thank you.